So you may remember that week 3 meltdown guy talking about the smoking ban, dry mouth, we heard each and every one of it, nearly has a heart attack in front of us. That guy, well, I think one of the contributing factors to that apprehension moment was certainly his fear about public speaking in general, but also his preparation. So he had prepared all this information, but he hadn't prepared it as a speech, and he hadn't prepared his notes. So notes are part of the performance. So you just want to make sure that you've got notes that allow you to deliver your material well. So I want to talk about sort of 3 of the typical ways you might organize your notes. Note cards, printing out an outline of your speech, or if you need to, and there are plenty of times when this would be necessary, a full-on manuscript. We typically don't spend too much time talking about fully manuscripted speeches in this class, but sometimes the occasion calls for it, and you might as well have good notes for it. So I want to note cards, outlines, and manuscripts. So let's start with note cards. A couple of do's and don'ts. Don't put too much on a card. Okay, so if I've got note cards, they're not very big. Okay, that's the whole purpose, right? Is they don't get in the way. They're not too much of a visual distraction between me and my audience. So they're not that big. Don't put too much on a card. Better to have more cards than having text that you have to read like this. A good note card should be able to be read from arm's length, right? You're just referencing it, and then not waving it around when you're not using it. So don't put too much on a card. As part of that, you really probably don't need to write out full sentences. If it's a reminder of where you want to go, they're just notes to help aid your extemporaneous speech, you probably don't need to be writing out full sentences. Certainly don't write too small, right? I should be able to read it, access it visually from about this distance. Don't make double-sided cards, unless you are, just absolutely desperately broke. Splurge, have 10 cards instead of 5. The gumball budget for that week will take a hit, but it'll be worth it. Okay, so don't make double-sided cards. The other side of this would be, the other side of this point, though not the other side of this card, would be some do's. If you've got main points and subpoints, put a single subpoint on a card, because then you've got a nice transition point, right? So let's say you're in your 1A, you've got that on a card, then as you're transitioning to your 1B, you've got a visual marker of that break as well as an auditory one. It's a nice way of keeping things easy to follow. If they're short points, put a full point on there. But really what you're trying to do is think about when you're going to take a break in the presentation. That's maybe when you're going to want to have a card shift. Shorten words and phrases. No one should be seeing your cards but you, and so just put enough on there to remind you of what you wanted to say. And I think it is a good point, a strategic point, to number your cards, right? So 1, 2, 3, 4, so on and so forth. Why? Let's say you're delivering a speech in a hurricane, because that's a neat place to deliver a speech. And you're speaking and you're talking, and as you go to transition that point, it's gone. And so then you're in the position of having to just sort of reach down and collect them, and then you've got your note cards, and where was I? That's not even my note card. So number your cards, okay? It could save you some time, some heartache, some stress later on if something happens. Helps keep you on track. So in making your note cards, let's say you're making your note cards from your outline. So hypothetically, let's say this is your outline text right here. Now, if this is your text, really a bad note card would be simply taking that outline and just cutting and pasting it on your note card. This has lots more information than you actually need on your note card. And since it's so much of your text, you're probably more primed to just flat out read it. So if that's a bad note card, I would say this would be a better note card, right? I'm reducing some of the information on the card. The phrasing's a little bit better. I've got a single subpoint on a single card. So this is a little bit more usable. I would say this is a better note card. If I perform my speech enough, I know what these evidence sources are. So I just, am indicating this is for a speech, an old speech about here in in Seattle, we live on top of an earthquake fault, and it's a very poor place for a city, but we've got elevated highways, the Alaskan Way Viaduct, and there was an argument a while back about whether or not to rebuild the viaduct, build under the viaduct, or retrofit it. So this was an argument for a retrofit. And so in this note card you see here, I've got it numbered, I've got short phrases here, and I've just got a reminder of what the evidence is. That note card I can look at, remind where I'm going, and deliver the point. So I would say this is a better note card if you're using note cards. Now let's go ahead and transition and say, well, let's say you're not using note cards. Sometimes note cards might be just out of place, okay? Sometimes in corporate settings, if you stand up with a stack of note cards, that feels very different. That feels at odds with sort of that particular culture. So sometimes you're going to want written notes. Let's say you want to work with your outline. I think that's great. That's how I often sort of speak, is with an outline. But what you want to do is make sure that outline is something that will actually aid you in that speech performance. So you're walking a delicate line here. Too much text, and you won't be able to quickly find your place on that outline. Too little text, and the notes aren't all that helpful. So here's a sample outline that I used in a recent presentation. Right, I've got my 3 key ideas, I've got my main points under each, and I've got enough here that I bring in this single sheet with me. This was probably, I don't know, about 15 minutes or so, more than that with Q&A. And so I've got something here that I can easily find my place on. I know the main breaks, so if I know what point I'm in, I can quickly reference what I'm doing next. It's got enough information that's reminding me of what information I wanted to make sure I talked about, what examples, who I talked to, expertise, so on and so forth. It's got enough information, but not so much that it's visually cluttering. So let's say, finally, note cards aren't going to do it, the outline's insufficient, and you actually need to deliver a manuscript speech. That's going to happen on occasion. For whatever reason, you have to do it. Again, make sure the script works for you. And how you wrote it in your word processing program, or how it might appear if you were going to hand it out to someone in paragraph form, is probably not how you want to make that manuscript for oral performance. So you're probably going to be using a bigger font. There's probably going to be more spacing. Just like with the note cards, I want to put in a card turn where there's a natural break in the presentation. I want to make sure that my paragraph breaks or my pause breaks are coming when I'm going to be turning a page. I don't want to write it so I'm turning a page mid-sentence. That's just bad planning. So I just want to make sure that I'm using this in a way where the page turn I have to do anyway is going to fall in a place that I want to be putting a pause. And then as I'm formatting that document, I probably want to focus on phrasing groups. So what do I want to say as a phrase rather than on paragraphs? I probably wrote it in paragraphs, but then I go through and I'm breaking out those paragraphs based on what are the phrases I want to deliver. So what you end up with is something that doesn't look like a series of paragraphs. You can see here, this is a manuscript speech I did not too long ago. So you see I've got lines that are really aimed at, that's what I'm going to perform. That chunk of talk, that sentence or 2 sentences is a chunk of talk, and I want to deliver it as a chunk. The big breaks, the drop downs are between these phrase groups. I want to put in lots of those so I can find my place on the page quickly and easily. So however you plan on using notes, you want to make sure that they're going to help you in that performance, be it note cards, outlines, or manuscript. Make sure you've chosen the right one for the occasion. If it's an extemporaneous setting, reading a manuscript isn't going to work. So you want to make sure you've chosen the appropriate mechanism. For these informative speeches, I'd recommend either for this class, I'd recommend either note cards or that outline model. Certainly not manuscripts for these speeches. Whatever you choose, practice with it. Okay, I am shocked how many times I see people practicing their speech, working on their speech, and then making their notes 5 minutes before they go deliver the speech. Man, that's a recipe for failure, because those note cards are going to be your lifeboat the second you stand up to speak. You wouldn't quickly patch together that metaphor doesn't work. If the ship were sinking, you would patch together a lifeboat as quickly as you could. In performance of a speech, you want to spend some time thinking about how is this actually going to shape your performance. No one ever needs to see your notes but you, so make them useful. And the way you're going to make them useful is by practicing with them. Figuring out if it's awkward to use in your notes, make sure that they're accessible and easy to use. And let me just conclude with one final point. Be it note cards or a manuscript, be kind to your notes. Often you'll see people delivering their notes or delivering their speech, and then they're nervous, and so they're mangling their notes. The notes didn't do you no harm. Be kind to those notes. And so too with your manuscript. If you've got a manuscript in a podium, great, keep it there. Reference it, but keep your hands free. You're not in the point of getting ready to swat a fly with it. Don't be mean to your notes. They're there to help you. They're your friend. Don't beat them up and be mean to them. So practice with those notes, plan those notes, and with that, improve your performance. And don't be that guy from week 3 who only at the moment of speaking learned that his notes were preparing him only for disaster.